Mastering the art of giving feedback well will help create a culture of candor. This spurs growth, performance, and innovation. Because the purpose of feedback is growth and development, it is truly an act of kindness to offer someone candid feedback. Well-delivered candid feedback can deliver these positive benefits. However, we often give feedback inartfully, and so it is often misinterpreted. Then it has the opposite effect and can damage trust and harm engagement. Becoming skillful at giving feedback will increase your odds of getting the positive benefits and decrease the odds of falling into the many pitfalls from poorly delivered feedback. When delivered well, feedback helps people work on blind spots they may not be able to see themselves. Your feedback skills can help someone hear the feedback and take actions that are both consistent with their personal goals as well as with the organization's goals. Think back over your career and what it feels like to have a boss who has your back. Chances are you felt that way because they always tried to be transparent with you when giving feedback, letting you know why the feedback was important to your growth and development. Becoming that kind of boss is the point of this mission. To get there, we are going to look at the difference between facts and stories, the understanding gap that always exists between how we see others and how they see themselves, our own blind spots around giving feedback well, and how feedback given with kindness can create psychological safety and trust. We believe we see the same thing that everyone else does. In this case, an iceberg floating on top of the ocean. But the truth is, we never see the whole of reality. And our stories about reality, our interpretations, dramatically impact what we see. We interpret events and information through the lens of our own life experiences, our assumptions, preferences, priorities, and beliefs about the way things should be. The problem is that we believe our interpretations are the truth, that they are facts. Think back to the last time a colleague or an employee missed a deadline or failed in reaching some targeted result. What happened when you found out? Did your blood pressure go up? Did you become tense, irritated, disappointed, angry? What did you think about the other person? Did you have a story about them? Either that this is an aberration or perhaps a disturbing pattern. When you next met to discuss the issue, did any of your thoughts and emotions color your communication? What about from their side? How were they feeling? And what was their story about the situation? These below the surface issues make it challenging to give and receive feedback. Often, below the surface issues have much more impact and are in much greater play than we typically realize. And they create the ring of truth in this Nietzsche quote. And they remind us that our stories and emotions are at least as powerful as our reason and logic. Seen in this light, there is little wonder that our communications suffer from an understanding gap. Here's another useful way to examine the understanding gap between you and the people you want to give feedback to. It's adapted from the Thanks for the Feedback book by authors Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. This graphic brings us into sharp relief the relatively tiny amount of shared reality between any two people. While we may think we are both looking at the same iceberg, the reality is that our shared experience is much more limited than we realize. Can you see the two big problems in this setup? We think we are giving feedback on the shared experience of their behavior, but that reality is highly colored both by our stories and by their stories. Let's take a deeper look at how this works by imagining a simple work assignment where the result is a less than satisfactory. The boss who assigned the work is disappointed. Starting on the left, your employee begins with their own thoughts and feelings about their capabilities in relationship to the assignment. They set intentions about what they want to make happen. They take actions to create results that have an impact on you. Those impacts feed a story you have about their intentions, characters, and capabilities. When you offer feedback regarding your perceptions, and they are totally perplexed, Your feedback feels totally off base from their experience of themselves. Let's stay with this example. When offering feedback, we need to be aware of these two competing and contradictory points of view. We attribute others' failures to a lack of character or competency, while we attribute our own failures to the situation. We judge others based on their actions and impact, while we judge ourselves based on our intentions. Being aware of this disconnect and built-in bias is a crucial step in learning how to give feedback that will be heard and acted upon. For example, you are disappointed that your employee failed to reach the desired result, and you want to offer feedback on what you see as a failure of collaboration. But your employee wants to explain the outcome by blaming the circumstances or explaining their intention as a way to make themselves feel less vulnerable. Given this gap, what could you anticipate regarding how an employee might respond to feedback you offer about how they could improve their collaboration? What could you do to maximize the chances of it being heard? Some good ideas might include setting aside my own story about them, acknowledging their intention, but separating it from their outcome, asking to coach them rather than evaluate, testing for their self-awareness with questions. We'll return to best practices in the next mission, but this is a good start. Remember, the iceberg and the understanding gap need to be acknowledged if you want to give feedback that will be acted upon. Let's consider another challenge to people hearing the feedback you are trying to give: your own blind spots. How our messages are heard or interpreted are significantly impacted by what we're not saying. Nonverbal cues and signals have a huge impact on how your words are received, much more than we normally give thought to. As this slide points out, our leaky faces, voice, and body language communicate far more than we are consciously aware of. It's a big blind spot. So while you may be saying, "I value your contributions," your voice, face, and body language may be saying something completely different. We've all experienced this, and me even have been called on it as well. Have you ever heard something like this from a loved one? "Honey, you're making that face again." So what can we do? We can alter the physical setup to create physical closeness and parity rather than distance and hierarchy. We can look for our own patterns and ask for our honest feedback on how we come across. This can be challenging for leaders since almost no one sees any benefit in honestly criticizing the boss. So you will need to break this pattern and get very specific, requesting honest evaluation of how you come across and explaining why you need it and that there will be no negative repercussions if they give it. When was the last time you sought out honest feedback from a peer, from a subordinate? Based on this feedback, what limiting patterns are you currently working on to improve? Here's an idea. Video or audio record your next brainstorming session, and then listen and watch the recording, looking for out-of-sync patterns. The results may shock you. MIT had some research finding that indicate up to 40% of variation in outcomes can be traced to nonverbal cues, being in alignment with the language of the business pitch or out of alignment. When talkers smiled and their voices and body language were animated, in alignment with their words, they were much more successful than others using the same language, but lacking the aligned nonverbal communication cues. These nonverbal cues have much more business impact than we realize. Lastly, and most importantly, change is an inside-out game. It's nearly impossible to fake sincerity. Just think back to when some of your supervisors and career counselors that you've had over the span of your career. Could you tell which ones were truly interested in your development and which ones were just going through the emotions? If you are frustrated by developmental conversations, it is bound to show. If that rings true for you, what can you do? We suggest you be honest and acknowledge why this is so, then work to change it. enrolling help, and becoming purposeful in your desire to develop people rather than heroically trying to solve their problems by telling people what to do. When giving feedback, it's good to remember we are all wired differently. Some people love feedback, some hate it. Others are in between. This is in part due to how long we sustain positive emotions and how quickly we recover from negative emotions. Knowing someone's feedback temperament can help us adjust how we deliver our feedback for maximum impact. Anyone who has raised 2 or more children is likely to have noticed this. Some people are naturally optimistic, what researchers have called long sustain of positive. Others have a much shorter positive sustain, and then you need to provide more consistent stimulation if you want to keep them positively focused. Another key factor is resilience, or how quickly we bounce back from failure. It's relatively easy to coach someone with high positivity and quick recovery. They love feedback, but others pose a challenge. The good news is that although our tendencies are wired in, research indicates that we can shift our positivity and resilience significantly, as much as 40%, which begs the question, what can you do to help people have slow recovery from negative feedback recover more quickly from that feedback? Well, you can use I statements that separate your perception of their behavior from your judgment on them. When I see you act without seeking stakeholder feedback, I question your commitment to collaboration. Ask for permission to coach or mentor. Ask them to self-evaluate first. What did you do well? Where do you think you could improve? It's important to realize that feedback of any type can generate that gut reaction of fear and stir up all kinds of feelings and emotions ranging from I'm not appreciated to I'm not good enough to I have no idea how I'm doing. As a coach, being clear about the purpose of the conversation could help settle the person and prepare him or her to hear what you have to say. You can also help reduce the effect of that natural automatic response by creating a welcoming environment that we've already talked about. Being present and open and respectful. Equally important is staying alert of changes your coachee might exhibit. Have they gotten very quiet? Have you noticed any changes in their facial expressions? Are they engaged or have they drifted off? When you notice these changes, you want to check in and ask what the coachee is thinking or feeling. Let's review how we can use this information to become more masterful at giving feedback that will be heard and acted upon. Here's a summary of best practices for giving feedback with kindness. Begin by acknowledging that we only see part of the picture. Probe to understand their perspective. Stay curious and respectful. Be direct, focused on facts rather than on story or opinion. Assume positive intent and that people are doing their best. Listen with their development in mind. Ask if your feedback was helpful and how you could support them. Do this consistently and you will be creating psychological safety by demonstrating that you care about them as well as the results they produce.